We're off to outer space. We're leaving Mother Earth to save the human race. Our star blazers.
Okay, apparently either Nishizaki or Matsumoto were heavily inspired by 2001: A Space Odyssey, because the space warp sequence, while not necessarily reminiscent of the cinematography of 2001: A Space Odyssey, definitely takes a few of the same stylistic cues from the film wherever possible, given the limited animation. And there's even a little bit of the Langoliers in there, given how the entire crew of the Argo gets knocked out during the warp. I can't help but also be a bit reminded of Gatchaman as well, as the series uses some pretty similar color changes and image warping distortion, per se, to kind of simulate the heavy G-forces that the ship and the crew inside would be experiencing when moving at such a high speed. This is also the episode where we see the Black Tigers deployed for the first time. For those of you who don't know, the Black Tigers are basically the little fighter ships that are inside the Argo. Now, it was an okay action scene, but you could tell that they could only do so much on the cheap. I mean, some of the animation of the episode itself was actually like really cheap, almost kind of the case where they were almost using paper cutouts, but I know they were using like cells, but you could tell they had only still images that they were trying to use to pass off as ships flying in an organized fleet. With that, I'd like to discuss the overall design of the Gamelons. Now, any Yamato fan would be able to tell you that the Gamelons were modeled after Nazi Germany in terms of their visual aesthetic, as well as how the characters conducted themselves. And this is especially visible in how the Gamelon fighters are designed, because you can tell they actually took some stylistic cues by modeling the Gamelon fighters after the various planes and bombers that were used by Germany during World War II. Now, it's pretty neat to see that kind of level of detail when you're designing the antagonist of your series, because that's something a lot of people don't really think about, where they think, okay, well, if it's going to be in this particular style, how would it look, even down to the grunt fighters level? So it was a pretty nice thing to notice. Character-wise, we don't get really that many moments, aside from like a quick comedic moment with Dr. Sane, and some mild character bits with Venture and Wildstar, as you have Venture kind of wrestling with the responsibilities of being the person in charge of making sure that the space warp works, as well as having Wildstar kind of go out of his way to make sure that a damaged Black Tiger space fighter manages to get back to the ship before they go through the warp. Now, the scene itself looked like it might have been edited for some content. I'm guessing the character probably got injured or something, but you can tell that there were some cuts, because it felt like there was just some stuff you weren't quite being shown there. Speaking of the space warp, I actually kind of like how a good chunk of the episode was dedicated to explaining how it worked. Granted, it wasn't like a full-on scientific lecture, but at least gives you an idea that it's not an easy maneuver to pull off. It's not like with Star Trek or Mass Effect, where the technology is already in place. You can tell that they're not quite familiar with it, and are dealing with forces and technology that they still don't have a grasp on. And so it really was nice to show that it's a case of, oh, this is a very complicated procedure that is very easy to screw up, and if you screw up, everybody on the ship will die. Overall, this episode had a nice degree of tension, more so than the previous episode, and while we may not have gotten that many character moments, you at least see some genuine progress as the Argo makes it to Mars as a result of the space warp. It felt like the story was actually moving forward, which was a problem I kind of had with the previous episode, because the previous episode, when it ends, they're still on Earth, even though they're already kind of doing the countdown, and I can understand, yeah, that's kind of how it would be in real life. They wouldn't start the clock after they've ventured off. They probably would still be keeping track of how much time they had left. But here, it was a lot more satisfying. You actually saw some real progress. You actually saw them move forward. You actually saw them on their way. And really, that's what I like about this episode. But that's all I really have to say about episode 4. There are only 22 episodes left.